Well, hello. How are you guys? Gals, brothers, sisters, family, friends? Tell me, how are you doing? I'd love to hear from you. Truly. It is outrageously beautiful. I'm so excited because you know what? The times are changing, are they not? And we're back for another ridiculously violent episode of the War of the Words. Last I left you all, we were in a ridiculous battle about engineering slaves. You know, the kinds of people that are just totally addicted to their bondage, which is most of us. Let's just be completely honest for a moment. Most of us inherit a lifetime of indoctrination that leads us into this ideological schisms, these like deep channels that are carved into our minds over and over and over and over and over again. You ever heard the analogy of when you want to like reinforce an idea? Is you just like pouring water into the mind. They talk about this thing in neuropsychology called neural plasticity. Basically, the idea is that your brain has these neurons in it, these like little hives of firing little wiring centers. And what happens is these little neurons, they think they're kind of flexible, right? So they say. They don't really know. But this is some of the theories. Anyways. These are like brain cells, things that communicate and tell our bodies to do all kinds of incredibly important stuff. Well, but they can change over time. We can affect them and impact them, and substances that we consume into our bodies or toxins that we're exposed to can drastically alter their makeup. But if you reinforce something over and over again, what happens is it's almost like you take water. If you look behind me here, this like pond area. But if you see over here on this side, just a wee bit that way, you see how that area has been carved away and washed away by the water. That's eroded it over time, right? It used to be much more level. You can tell how it's eaten it away. Even this area here around me, this used to be much higher. Like the level of the earth used to be much higher. But then they dammed up a waterway and it began to raise up this water around here. Beavers do this tremendously effectively, which is why I love beaver-chewed staffs. Shout out to staffs chewed by beavers. Anyways, they dam these things up, and what it does is it alters the landscape. The earth, which normally is not moving very much, right? Like, or at all. Consider it. Anyways, because of that, it's not easy to move mountains, but water does it super effectively. And just by water washing over this from the erosion of the rain above coming down into this area, and because this water level rises and eats away at the softer, sandier bits of the soil, it erodes it and creates an entirely new pathway. So to our minds. When our minds are exposed to a new concept, a new idea that is unfamiliar to us, that is foreign to us, at first it's untenable. It's difficult to even digest it. Like really to understand and comprehend it is very difficult and painful because we're encountering a lot of resistance, right? That's like the bedrock of your brain. Right? And that's because we all, by and far, were raised in a society that engineered our minds to think a very specific kind of way. Now, where did that thinking system come from? I'm going to read to you guys. We're going to get to the War of the Words from the Scriptures, but I'm going to show you a War of the Words from another book that has been one of my resource tools for many years, and I do recommend it. It's obviously engineered for a different kind of warfare, and it's just a history, a historical discourse, shall we, of guerrilla warfare. If you're unfamiliar with guerrilla warfare, it's not basically silverback gorillas fighting each other. It's a concept, it's a wording that's used to describe asymmetrical warfare, a type of fighting that is not traditional. It's not like, you know, two uniformed armies meeting together at a line, a designated front line, and fighting it out and seeing which man and which soldier unit had the best gusto, the best tactics and strategies in order to overcome each other in combat. Asymmetrical warfare is fighting in non-traditional types of ways. And if you actually read through the scriptures, you see this is most consistently the method that is deployed by the Israelites. The Israelites were like honed guerrilla warfighters consistently. Like whenever you want to study any type of guerrilla warfare, I most recommend the scriptures, because even as I'm going through this discourse from history on this methods that different people have deployed over time and millennia, what they missed was the entirety of the scriptures. They don't use it as chronologically as part of the history that could have identified many of the methods and the tactics of how to fight asymmetrically. But even if you go back to Joshua, Yahusha, as he's read in the scriptures, how he goes in and wages his war in Canaan, and how he will fight soldiers with what's called like a feigned attack, where they charge at a city and a fortress in AI. Let me just read it for a second, because this is pretty rad. Check this out. Okay, everybody's probably pretty familiar with the idea of Jericho. The walls came tumbling down. That was super asymmetrical warfare. They marched around a city with a box, like a rectangle, an ark, to be precise, like the literal mercy seat of Yahuwah. It said he would sit there and put his feet up on it, like a pretty epic place. And it was shrouded in a deep blue, sapphire-like linen shroud covering over it to like guard it from being able to be seen. But they were just walking around with this blue rectangular box on poles with priests blowing ram's horns, shofars. And all the soldiers are told to be quiet. They're not even to speak a word. They march around the city one time and go back into camp. The next day they do it again. The next day they do it again. The next day they do it again. They do this 6 times in a row. And on the 7th day, they raise a great shout. They march around the city 7 times. The priests blow their shofars like maniac. Right? I totally forgot my shofar. Anyways, they blow their shofars. And then everybody shouts like crazy, as loud as they possibly can. There's a frenzy of fish right there. That's exciting. Just like that. And then the walls come tumbling down flat. And then every man charges straight up into the city and destroys everybody in the city. That's Jericho, right? Super asymmetrical warfare, okay? Non-traditional fighting at all. Look at that. Just a frenzy of these fish right here. It's fantastic. So the city of Ai is like a tiny town comparatively. Like Jericho is ridiculously massive and reinforced, and everybody knows that's the heart of the bad news bears. You don't want to start your warfare there. But he does because, you know, why not pierce right through the middle? If you look at the map of Israel and the promised land that they're going into, it's almost like they divide it straight into the middle. They start by piercing into the side. It'd be like people attacking Montana, right? Like instead of going to the coasts on either side, they're like, you know what we're going to start? Let's go right to Montana. I hear there's some big elk out there. Let's go start and pierce our way right in through it. Or like New Orleans would be maybe another option. They're dividing the country in half, which is a really interesting strategy. Now, Yahushua gets a lot of charges from Moshe on his when he goes in to wage these wars. And one of the most consistent ones is Chazak Hamatz, which is be strong, be courageous. You'll hear this all throughout, right? And you're like, he is all about this phrase. In the first chapter of Yahushua, he literally tells him 4 times, be strong, courageous, Chazak Hamatz. It's like the war cry of the Israelites. It's like there's supposed to be one valiant cry that's echoing forth across our lips. It's Chazak Hamatz. It's like be strong, be valiant, be steadfast, be alert, be vigilant, be on guard, be willing to persevere. Like do not relent. I wrote a bunch of this down because these are just so salty, right? Be alert, be courageous. Do something that is performed with much difficulty. Strengthen yourself to be able to perform the task. Be adopted. Be comforted. Be valiant. Pursue things even if they require much effort. This is what Moses is telling Joshua. You're about to go into warfare, and this is what's going to be required of you, to be able to persevere amidst these kinds of circumstances. So they conquered Jericho, and they're like, yeah, we totally slaughtered Jericho, we're champions. You would too if you did it, right? And now, after Jericho, there was a super important commandment that was given to them, which was that everything in Jericho was to be under the ban, like totally destroyed, except for the things that could pass through the fire, which was the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, okay? Things that could be melted down and pass through the fire and like basically sterilized, because there's a whole lot of nonsense like transgenic nightmare stuff, crazy, incredible debauchery going on in these places. Y'all have to understand. It's a lot like our GMO foods. Basically a same thing that's taking place where they're mixing all kinds of nasty bits. They would bury their children in the walls of Jericho. This is really fundamental. They still do this in the city of London. They still do this in places all over the world where they sacrifice their children into the walls of a fortress or a building structure, and all over Africa. Great constant prevalence of this with witch doctors down there. When people build businesses and buildings, they sacrifice children and put them in the walls and the foundations of it. Still today, all over the world. This is a universal theme. When they uncovered and excavated the walls of Jericho, they found the entombed carcasses, bones of children that had been sacrificed into the walls. They believed this was basically like supercharging the walls, which is why there was a different supercharging that took place when they marched around the city and they blew their shofars. Like it was like Yahuwah was undoing the cries of the innocent that were inside that place, and instead the cries of the innocent shouted so loudly against them that the blood came back down upon their own heads. That's total mishpat. That's ridiculous justice. Anyways, because of that, they said nobody was to take any of the stuff from this city. Don't touch it. Don't keep it. That's mine. You destroy everything in it. Burn it with fire, right? But the children of Israel committed a trespass regarding of that which is under the ban. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zarach, of the tribe of Yehudah, took of that which is under the ban. And the displeasure of Yahuwah burned against the children of Israel. Now Yahusha sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Beth Awan, on the east side of Beth El, and spoke to them, saying, Go up and spy out the land. And the men went up and spied out Ai. And they returned to Yahushua and said to him, Let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and smite Ai. Do not make all the people toil up there, for the people of Ai are few. And about 3,000 men went up there from the people, but they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai smote about 36 men, for they pursued them from before the gate as far as Shavarim, and smote them on the descent. So the hearts of the people melted and became like water. See, that's that neuroplasticity, because the brain isn't the only area of our bodies that has these neurons, okay? If you get a heart transplant, I'm not recommending it in any capacity. However, I do have family members that have had heart transplants, and there's this incredible effect that can take place, even also with places in like the liver and the heart. When you transplant a heart into another person, memories of the other person's life can be implanted into the other person. Like, not mind control implantation stuff. I'm talking about people that never knew these things about the person who they got their organ heart from, have memories, deep ensconced memories of that other person's life. And it's because there are neurons attached to the heart itself. Your heart literally is like an encoding center for your body. Like, it's actually where much of your mind and your spirit and your soul, it's like it's a resting place, like your throne. It's an aspect of your identity and of your being. And it can be firmed and strengthened, or it can be melted like water. And that's exactly what's taking place here. The most potent effect for the adversary, for the adversary to use against us, is fear, to fill our hearts with fear. But there's this scripture that says we should be not overcome, right, with fear. Hundreds of times we're told, Altira, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, Altira, be not afraid. Over and over and over and over, from Bereshit, from Genesis, the beginning to the end, you're told, be not afraid, but be courageous, right? There's only one that we are supposed to fear. One in the entirety of creation, one being we're supposed to fear and reverence, and that's our Father, the Creator, the mightiness of our awesome, the working hand of our mighty one. We fear him, and we're to fear nothing else. But when our fear transfers to men, we have a major problem. And that is where our hearts become to inhabit and become a throne for fear to set into it, like an idol. And that's what's taking place here. The Israelites now are like, oh my gosh, we just got smashed. What are we going to do? Their hearts are totally made like water. And Yahushua tore his garments and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of Yahuwah until evening, both he and the elders of Yisrael, and they put dust upon their heads. And Yahushua said, O Adonai Yahuwah, why have you brought this people over the Yarden at all? To give us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us. If only we had been content to stay beyond the Yarden. O Yahuwah, what do I say? When Israel turns its back before its enemies, and the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land hear it, and shall surround us and cut off our name from the earth, what then do you do for your great name? And Yahuwah said to Yahushua, rise up. Why are you lying on your face? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them, and they've taken some of that which is under the ban, and have both stolen and deceived, and also put it among their own goods. And the sons of Israel shall not be able to stand before their enemies. They are going to turn their backs before their enemies, for they have been accursed. I am not with you anymore, unless you destroy that which is under the ban from your midst. Rise up, Kadesh the people, and you shall say, Kadesh yourselves for tomorrow, because thus says Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael. That which is under the ban is in your midst. O Yisrael, you are not able to stand before your enemies until you put away that which is under the ban out of your midst. And you shall be brought near in the morning according to your tribes. And it shall be the tribe which Yahuwah takes comes according to the clans. And the clan which Yahuwah takes comes by households. And the household which Yahuwah takes comes by men. And it shall be that he who is taken with that which is under the ban is burned with fire. He and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of Yahuwah, and because he has committed wickedness in Israel. See, there's these things that Yahuwah has given edicts that should not ever be brought into your household. Like they're set apart to destruction. And many of those, like he gave very clear and specific instructions about things that will, when they come into your body, they come into your life, they become into, attach themselves to you, that they abominate you. They make you basically accursed, like unclean. But more so than that, like they're literally changing you out of the image of who he intended you to be, and they're beginning to transform you into the image of this world. And he's like, I am all about being set apart. Like that's the defining characteristic. If there's one characteristic about our Creator, it's that he is Kadosh, set apart. People would say holy, right? But really what holy is just kind of this ethereal, like naked baby angels flying in the clouds kind of term that's been thrown around through our lives. It really means set apart, distinct, not like the other. And he says 3 times, he is holy, holy, holy. Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh. Set apart, set apart, set apart. These mighty cherubim or seraphim fly around his throne day and night, continually saying how Kadesh he is. He is distinct and unique. And in order for his ruach, his spirit to dwell and abide in us, we got to try to set ourselves apart and be a distinction, make ourselves clean. And you know what? By believing in his son, ultimately, he can cleanse us and wash us of our unrighteousness and create in us clean hearts and renew a right spirit within us. But then if we want to maintain vigilance to guard, to safeguard our tabernacle and our temple, this is why I have that whole, the Mighty Maccabees series, which was about these people that were zealous to guard the physical temple, where the presence of Yahweh was supposed to be, from these outsiders of the world who came in and literally were requiring them to eat pork, to abominate their bodies. Like when we eat these other foods that he has outlined to us as foods that are not foods, we abominate ourselves. We make ourselves rendered unclean. And he is trying to get us away from that. Even I just went on down this dive, because it's not just that, right? There's so many others of these abominations. Hold on, there's a critter. Do you hear that? Someone thumping around over there. It's okay, you got my back. Anyways, but there's all these other substances that get brought into our bodies. Like we don't even think about it. We're like, I don't buy pork, I don't even eat it. But it's like, it's utilized in so many other things. And another one, like I just had this realization when I was studying about excitotoxins. You guys ever heard of excitotoxins? Because I haven't. But anyways, excitotoxins, things like artificial sweeteners, right? You ever heard of Splenda? Right, or aspartame or any of those kinds of things. These are excitotoxins. And what that means is like when they go into our bodies, this is what's Diet Cokes. If you guys are drinking Diet Coke right now, I'm begging you, please consider heartily what I have to say next, because these are super strongholds in our lives. And this stuff is straight up poison, like directly lead to strokes and brain damage and heart damage, like super seriously bad news stuff, y'all. Like high fructose corn syrup and the regular sodas are already a nightmare in and of itself. Like I tried to show my child the process of high fructose corn syrup being made the other day, and she just couldn't get her head around it. Like it was just ridiculous to her. She's like, this is what people eat. And I'm like, yes, honey. Like, because it makes our bodies feel like it's super sweet. Like high fructose corn syrup tricks your body into thinking it's way sweeter than it like really is. Well, excitotoxins are that, but only more so, right? They're like the guerrilla war fighters of society's food mechanisms. Like artificial sweeteners enhance these flavor receptors in our body to detect sweetness, right? We have individual cells that literally they molecularly like attach to. They're like bing, and it just makes your cell go like, yes, I've never thought it was sweet in my entire life. That's a problem, because like even stevia can do this, which is definitely something I've used like constantly throughout my life. And I've always felt like maybe this isn't so good, you know, like because you eat a little tiny bit of it and it's like an explosion of glorious sweetness all at once. Well, what happens is when your cells react so strongly like that, it's like if it starts buzzing, that excitement that's firing so rapidly, it's like burning up the lifetime use of that cell. Does this make sense? Like, it's like you're getting a month's use of that cell's sweetness receptors all at once. And so it's just burning it up super quickly, and it causes cell death, right? It damages the cells. And so when you're doing this in your body on a repeated, ongoing basis, it's damaging your neurons, right? It's damaging your cells, and it's causing harm to your body. This is abominating us, right? He's like, I came to give life, not just any life. Like he came to give us life to the fullest, like the greatest expression of life. We're supposed to be living vibrantly, passionately. Like when you eat fresh fruits and vegetables that come off of the vine, off of the tree, out of the ground, like when you eat it fresh, the cells are alive, they're exploding with energy, and you eat it and you're like, I feel amazing. When I eat freshly harvested meat, Like meat that I raise and I slaughter it, and I know it dies the right way, and I know that it doesn't die a violent death. And when I eat that animal, it fuels me like crazy. When I make a stock from its bones and from its organs, and like when I eat these animals in that way, I feel so fueled up and energized in such a powerful way. And so many other people do when they eat in a unique way, which is not the same as what we get from the society and from these processed foods. They abominate us, they damage us, they make us not able to be the ones we are supposed to be. And so like there's this deep need in each and every one of us, like to not eat food dyes, like things that are only there for vanity's sake, like these artificial food dyes that come from petrochemicals, like red, you ever read about yellow 5 or red 40, or you look at the back of this stuff and you're like, yeah, why are these chips blue? And they're like, oh, for your vanity. Vanity is here to murder your soul and to destroy your body again. Like these things cause hyperactivity. You wonder why a lot of your children might be having ADHD-like stuff or bipolar-like stuff. Seriously, eliminate all food dyes out of your diet for 40 days and watch how different your family is. Watch how different your children are when you eliminate food dyes and artificial sweeteners from their diet in its entirety. Like it's incredible. And this is why we're so passionate about like fresh milled flour, because you eat that and you're like, I feel amazing. I feel satisfied. Like I'm eating my bread to satisfaction. Like these are the tools that are necessary for us. If we're gonna fight effective warfare, if we're gonna wage our war of words, we must be able to articulate our dissent. We must be able to articulate our abstinence, why we do not choose to participate in certain aspects of these systems of the world. Because when we can do that, we empower other people with weapons of their own warfare. We give them an arsenal of tools to fight their war. Moshe, when he wanted to fight this war in the promised land, he was banned from it. He was told he could not cross over into the promised land because he brought Yahuwah's name vain. He made it vain. He mocked it, basically. When Yahuwah told him to take his rod with him and go and strike the rock, a flinty rock that you can see in the wilderness to this day.
From Mount Sinai, the children of Israel began their journey, traveling on the east side of Mount Sinai. Journeying north, they then turned west to enter the Wadi Araba, the wide stretch of land that is part of the great Afro-Syrian Rift. Before they reached the southern end of the Dead Sea, they turned again to the west. Here, they settled just before the foothills that led up into the land of Canaan, the Promised Land. Here, they were at Kadesh Barnea.
Here you see a large stone that was placed in the main sluiceway of the stream as it came down the mountain. And this made the water, shall we say, cascade up into the air, landing several feet distant here and eroding an impressive area out of the rock. And it was from these holes in the rock that they were able to retrieve the water. And of course, as the water came on down out of this area, it flowed down through this area here, of course on out into the wide valley here that was home to the Israelites twice in their wanderings, and of course for an unknown period of time at the beginning of their wanderings. It was while camped here that they sent out the spies, and as a result of the report of 10 of these spies, they decided that they couldn't take the land, and they rebelled against Moses. And then when God told them that because of their lack of confidence in him after all he had done for them, that they would all die in the wilderness, at least the males, the adult males. And so after this, they determined that they would attack the enemy, and of course they mounted an assault up into the high country and were defeated, because without God's help they were not a match for these people. And the people had been shall we say, warned by their priests and by the fact that God had divided the waters of the sea. And so they were told to fight like men. In other words, they were to put everything they had into the battle. And the results was that without God's assistance, they did not come off very well in that arrangement. And here are the pits that the water has eroded away.
Day. He struck it the first time. He told them, go strike that rock. They struck it, water gushed out of it, watered all the people. Well, they went and circled back around to that place a while later. And he told them this time, take your staff with you. And this time I want you to speak to the rock. And he did it. And he was so angry with the people and he was all pissed off. And he struck the rock again and water gushed out, right? Well, he said he basically lowered his name. He brought Yahweh's name down. And you know what that was supposed to be an image of? Yeshua, who the first time he came, the hay that was revealed, the man who came, he was revealed the first time and he was struck and he was beaten and he was crushed so that we could have the living water that came out of him to fuel us, to water our souls and to give us the life, right? The second time when he comes, he's not going to be struck. You know what he's going to do? He's going to speak the word and the world is going to be purged and cleansed through his words, okay? But Moses didn't do it in that order and he didn't reveal the Messiah in those ways that he was supposed to. And so that was a major transgression and that cost him dearly, right? So he is charged, though, when we go back into Deuteronomy chapter 3, which is where we were at our war in the words. We'll get back to Achan, don't you worry. Achan's going to be Achan here in a minute. That's how I remember that dude. He made a really bad decision. It's going to cost him ferociously. Let's go back to Devarim, chapter 3. This is when Yahuwah is giving some of these edicts about why he's not going into that land, first of all, and how that land is going to get divided when they're going to go cross into it, all right? So this is Devarim, chapter 3. Then we turned and went up to the way of Bashan. And Og, the sovereign of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. Now this dude's a super giant, like real legitimate giant, massive giant. We're not talking like some kind of big dude. We're talking gigantic human, all right? Terrifying human. And Yahuwah said to him, do not fear him. Okay, that's that altira, okay? In this parallel Hebrews translation, this is the phrase, do not fear. And then you see it over here in red. Right there, Altira. Aleph, you get Lamed Aleph, and then you get He, you get Tav, Yod, Resh, Aleph. Altira, do not fear, do not be afraid, okay? For I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand, and you shall do to him as you did to Achan, the sovereign of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So Yahuwah our Elohim also gave into our hands Og, the sovereign of Bashan, with all his people, and we smote him until he had no survivors remaining. And we captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the district of Argob, the reign of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars, beside a great and many unwalled towns. And we put them under the ban, as we did to Sihon, the sovereign of Heshbon, putting the men, the women, and the children of every city under the ban. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as a booty for ourselves. And at that time we took the land from the hand of the two sovereigns of the Amorites that was beyond the Yarden, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon. Now again, these are people that have abominated themselves to such a level that 400 years earlier when he gave this promise to Abraham that he was like, hey, I'm going to send you out to this promised land and you and your people are going to inherit it. It's all going to be yours. He says, but you can't go yet because the iniquity of the Amorites, that's who we're talking about literally right here, their iniquity is not full, meaning they have not committed enough abominations. Like there's like a threshold here that he wants these people to reach before he's going to pour out his total cup of wrath upon their heads. And he's like, it's not yet. Later on in Israel's days, y'all, they commit more sins than these people who did before them. So as much as we want to sit here and be like, they're all a bunch of Nephilim, GMO monsters, you know what? The Israelites started to abominate themselves to the same level and exceeded that. Like in the days of Manasseh, it says they did more evil than the people that were in the lands before them. Like, meaning You guys it's really easy to go on a witch hunt and try to look at all of the monsters in the world and be like, you guys gotta see what BCCI is doing and all these bankers are doing and how the East India Trading Company and Henry Kissinger's and all their progeny have taken over the world and the Council on Foreign Relations. And you start to identify all these things. And I'm not trying to detract from the fact that these are some of the shakers and movers of our society. These people are super abominated in so many ways, but you also need to understand you yourself could be potentially ripe to just become as abominated as many of them. I know you think you can't, and I know you think you're above it, but you've never been fully, deeply ensconced and deceived to such another level that you're willing to sacrifice your children to build up the wall of your empire. Many of you have just never been tested with the riches of nations. It's a totally different kind of testing and temptation when the nations of the world are offered to you and the power to do it. It doesn't even happen very often to many Hebrews and Israelites in history because often they fall apart, like Manasseh and others that did. Solomon fell apart in it, in a part of it, and he abominated himself, and he led the nation away into debauchery, into worshiping other Elohim. He offered his own children in fires and sacrifices. You guys have not yet been tested by that. Maybe some of you that are watching have, and you understand what I'm talking about. I've witnessed this and seen this and been raised in a culture that endorsed this and practiced this. And it is an area of life that really does imbue them with power in a totally different kind of way. What you're looking at here is Yahuwah trying to render judgment against that, and he's trying to eradicate that. So before you're so quick to try to point out all of the adversaries of our society, you need to remember the most important adversaries we need to deal with first are the ones that are contending against us and trying to steal away our shalom, the Prince of Shalom, and to destroy our identity in him and in his children so that we can guard and revere his word and that we can walk boldly forward and be able to, if should ever he give us the ability, slay and conquer these nations and bring about his kingdom on this earth. We're to guard ferociously first, though, these words. These are the words of the testimonies. Verse 9. The Zidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir, and all the cities of the plain, all of Gilead, and all of Bashan as far as Sakah, and Edrei, the cities of the reign of Og and Bashan. For only Og, the sovereign of Bashan, was left, of the remnant of the Rephaites. These are the descendants of the Nephilim. Like the Rephaim are like the children of the Nephilim. Okay, the Nephilim are the offspring of the fallen watcher angels that came down in the days of Jared on Mount Hermon, and they mingled with women. They took human wives and they mated with them, and they created this other kind, this other thing called the Nephilim, a mixture between the two, where like you get in mythologies around the world, these titans, and you get these heroes, right, of Greek antiquity and all this stuff. These are these other deities, these other Elohim that are worshipped, that are gods but are not gods, right? These are these beings. Now, Og here that you're dealing with and are these descendants of them, right? And so that's who you're dealing with right now. And they're saying, for only Og, the sovereign of Bashan, was left, of the remnants of the Rephaites. See, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon? 9 amah is its length, and 4 amah is its width, according to the amah of a man. Amah is the Hebrew word transliterated English of cubit, from elbow to fingertip, like a man's cubit. That's your cubit. You have a cubit that's going to be a little different than mine. But they're saying he had this massive iron bedstead because he was so dense and heavy. His bones were thicker. He was physically much wider than a normal human. As people get up in size, they also get wider in size. And this is what made them much mightier, more stable fighters from hand-to-hand combat perspective. Outrageous. Watch my Becoming a Gibborim Headshots episode if you want to see more giant talk and slayer talk. It's pretty fantastic. Anyways. And this land which we possessed at the time of Eor, which is by the Wadi Arnon, and the half mountains of Gilead, and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites, that's one of the tribes of Yisrael, and the Gadites, that's another tribe. Yair, the son of, and the rest of Gilead, and all Bashan, the reign of Og, I gave to the half the tribe of Manasseh, that's another one of the tribes. All the district of Argob, with all of Bashan, called the land of the Rephaites. Yair, the son of Manasseh, had taken all the district of Argob, as far as the border of the Gerishites, and the Machakathites, and called them after his own name, Ha-Bashan Hawath, Yair, to this day. And to Machir I gave Gilead. And to the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave from Gilead as far as the Wadi Arnon, the middle of the wadi as the border, as far as the Wadi Yabak, the border of the children of Arman. Hang with me. I know some of this, y'all, means nothing to you because you've never lived in the land. However, these are super important fundamentals. This is like the survey map of the inheritances of Yisrael. Really critical pieces of information. And the desert plain with the Yarden as the border from Kinnereth as far as the Sea of Arava, the salt sea below the slopes of Pisgah on the east. And I commanded you at that time, saying, Yahuwah your Elohim has given you this land to possess. All your sons of might, pass over armed before your brothers, the children of Yisrael. Let your wives and your little ones and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, stay in your cities, which I have given you, until Yahuwah has given rest to your brothers as to you. And they also possess the land which Yahuwah your Elohim is giving them, beyond the Yarden. Then you shall return, each man to his possession which I commanded you. These tribes that are staying beside, they saw this land of Bashan in this area. This is not in the promised land really that they were supposed to inherit. This is on the other side of it. And they saw it and were like, oh, this is such rich pasture. We just want to live over here. Can we have our inheritance over here? And Moses was like, no, because you're not going to go over and help your brothers fight all of the giants out of their land. And they were like, no, we promise. Just let us stay, build little sheepfolds for our families, and so our wives and our children and our flocks can stay there. And then we'll go over armed and help our brothers, the other tribes of Yisrael, take their inheritances. So he says, as long as you do this, you can have it. But if you don't, you're going to be accursed. Big problem. Anyways, and I commanded Yahushua at this time, saying, your eyes have seen all that Yahuwah your Elohim has done to these two sovereigns. Yahuwah does the same to all the reigns which are passing over. Do not fear them. There's that altira again. Do not fear them. For Yahuwah your Elohim himself fights for you. See, that's the most important two phrases to understand asymmetrical warfare from a Hebrew perspective. If you're a Yisraelite, like the first commandment is do not be afraid of them. Yahuwah is the one who fights for you. When our ways are pleasing before our Father, he makes even our enemies to be at peace with us. That's a super important fundamental concept of our warfare, is that we don't have to fight. There's times where literally nothing happens, but people sit there. They sit there. They're like, don't even move. Don't even get up. You watch me win. Like there's times when nobody picked up a finger to fight a battle, and 184,000 were slain in a night by one messenger of Yahuwah. My contention is perhaps it could have been our Mashiach. Anyways, in one night, he slaughtered an entire army that had been raised up for years, for lifetimes. You think of how long it takes to raise up 180,000+ humans to go fight a war? It takes a serious amount of time. Okay, there's armies of over 1 million people that came to slaughter Israel, 1 million humans, and they all died. Like they all were totally turned back and destroyed. Like 1 million humans raised up to fight. This is why this is asymmetrical warfare only. When you fight in Yahuwah's kingdom, you fight completely tangentially. You're not the linear fighter that most humans are used to fighting, which is why it makes you so difficult and frustrating. And I pleaded with Yahuwah at that time, saying, Oh Adonai, now this is Moshe's like prayer. Consider these words. Oh Adonai Yahuwah, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For who is a mighty one in the Shemaim, or on earth, who does according to your works and according to your might? I pray, let me pass over and see the good land beyond the Yarden, this good hill country in Lebanon. But Yahuwah was enraged with me for your sake, and he would not listen to me. And Yahuwah said to me, enough of that. Speak no more to me about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah, and lift up your eyes westward, and northward, and southward, and eastward, and look with your eyes, for you do not pass over this Yarden. But command Yahusha, and strengthen him, and make him brave, for he shall pass over before this people, and cause them to inherit the land which you see. And we dwelt in the valley opposite of Beth Peor. This was the most important command Moshe gets at the end of his life, is to make Joshua, to make Yahusha brave, to make him strong. If any of you have one charge, especially if you are a man, your job is to make others be brave, to be courageous, to know that they can conquer those giants that are facing them in the mirror, and they can conquer those giants that are outside the camp. But in the beginning, so much of our focus is to make ourselves set apart for him, so that we can have his spirit come upon us and live valiantly and live mightily. And the way we do that is to fuel ourselves in our weapons to sharpen our sword with this sword. You see how Joshua dealt with Achan was to put away the abomination that had gotten into their midst. They put it away from themselves. Now listen, this is chapter 7. So Yahusha arose early in the morning and brought Yisrael by their tribes, and the tribe of Yehuda was taken. So now they're picking, okay, who is the bad guy? They're trying to figure out who's the guy who stole all that stuff, right? They're trying to figure it out. And so they brought the clan of Yehuda, and he took the clan of Zerachites, and he brought the clan of Zerachites by men, and Zabdi was taken, and he brought his household by men, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerach, of the tribe of Yehuda was taken. So then Yahusha said to Achan, my son, now give esteem to Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael, and make confession to him, and please declare to me what you have done. Do not hide it from me. So Achan answered Yahusha and said, truly I have sinned against Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael, and this is what I did. When I saw among the spoil a lovely garment from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them, and I took them. And see, they're hidden in the ground in the midst of my tent, with the silver under it. And Yahusha sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and see, it was hidden in his tent, with the silver under it. And they took from the midst of the tent, and brought them to Yahusha, and to all the children of Yisrael, and laid them out before Yahuwah. Then Yahusha and all of Yisrael with him took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons, and his daughters, and his oxen, and his donkeys, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had. And they brought them to the valley of Achor. And Yahusha said, why have you troubled us? Yahuwah troubles you today. Then all of Yisrael stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire, after they stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones, which remains to this day. Then Yahuwah turned from the fierceness of his displeasure. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. This is the consequences of abominating ourselves, of taking those things. Remember, what was it that Achan did? It says he saw. He was beguiled by the sight, the lust of the eyes. It says these are basically the three most fundamental things we wrestle against: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. This is 1 John. I should just read this to you, because it's really fundamentals to our warfare, y'all. All right? Achan was taken captive by the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh. Here we go. Yochanan 1. I write to you, this is 1 John chapter 2, or Yochanan 2. I write to you, little children, because your sins have been forgiven on account of his name. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you have overcome the wicked one. I write to you, little children, because you have known the Father. And I write to you, fathers, because you have known him from the beginning. And I write to you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of Yahuwah stays in you, and you have overcome the wicked one. See that? That's the strength of Joshua, the strength of Yahusha, the strength of our Messiah, the strength of Yochanan the Immerser, the strength of Gideon. This is the strength of David, is that the word is in you. That's where the strength comes from. This is the strongest substance in the face of creation, is right here. These words, they are your strength. That is what Yahusha appealed. That's where he got his courage. That's where he got his lack of fear of the adversary. It's that he had these words in them. You young men, you do have vigor and strength, especially. And there's this artificial concept called adolescence that's been put upon so many of young men and young women, where they say, you're a teenager now, and you can basically stay that till you die. It's ridiculous. This is why like college exists, to just rape you of your manliness and your femininity, to steal from you the prime years of your life where you're to labor ferociously, not in a debtor system. Like if you want to learn something, go and learn it with all your might. Parents, that's our job, to empower our children to learn a skill, to learn a trade, to learn how to be husbands and wives and fathers and mothers. Like these are the fundamentals to how to be a brother, to how to be a sister, but how to be a child of Elohim is far more exceedingly important and critical critical than anything else we could ever teach them. And if you plant them in one of those systems, you indoctrinate them with tens of thousands of hours of mind-controlled, engineered destruction. Listen to this, all right? This is why history is so important, okay? Because if you study and analyze history, you'll understand why our education system, like where it comes from. And in the 1800s, y'all, there's some super fundamentally critical, important things that took place in Europe, all right, which influenced us tremendously, okay? And during the late 1800s, okay, like 1860s, 1870s, we're all thinking about Civil War. That's all we ever get taught in our history classes. They're like, world history. I never got taught any of this stuff about like why the American model of education system or where it came from. But like it came from this wars that were fought over in Europe between the French and the Prussians. The Prussians are like where we get Germany mostly today, all right? Well, the German society had gotten their freaking rear ends slaughtered, eviscerated horrifically. Napoleon just wrecked shop over in Europe. Like, ah! And the Prussians were like, we have got to find a way to win these wars. We have got to find a way to train our soldiers so that they only obey our orders like perfectly. Because they basically said, the reason we lost this war was because our soldiers just didn't do exactly what we told them, the exact way we told them to do it. They lacked basically, they had too much free thoughts and critical thinking and self-preservation instilled in them. So let's come up with an education system that basically would train them to have, listen, this is what they came up with. I think it's chapter 17. This is chapter 17. Remember, this is Robert B. Asprey's War in the Shadows. All right? Now pay attention here, because that victory that the Prussians then had, they came up with the class system of indoctrination of schooling. Okay? This is why we have a class system in our schools where you're like told tens of thousands of times to stay in your class, go back to your class, go back to your classroom. Why aren't you in your class? You need a hall pass to get out of your class, right? This is class warfare. We don't think about it as social classes, but they're reinforcing in you your idea that you have a class that you were born into, and that's where you stay. You stay in that class unless we tell you otherwise, unless the gatekeeper, right, the teacher, the principal, this whoever position in authority, an expert, says otherwise, right? This was designed so that children would have this fierce patriotism and nationalism. This is how it was originally used as a tool to create soldiers, so that they would have this fierce loyalty to the emperor, to the kings, to the monarchs, to the ruling system, right? To the ones who were the egalitarians over society. That they would create a class system that would engineer that obedience, right? Well, after the war in the 1870s, the Prussians slaughter the French the next time they come around. This is, I think, Napoleon the Great's the third. This is like the Napoleon the Third, King Napoleon the Third. So this is a couple generations after Napoleon. They fight a war with Prussia and they get their butts kicked by the Prussians. They smoke them terribly. And so the French are like, what just happened to us? We need to reevaluate our lives. We need to go home and rethink their lives. That's what they do. So this chapter is basically going over a discourse of how they reworked their armies and to get them to come back into a place of it. So Major Caldwell laid far more stress on military problems of colonialization than on political problems, a priority natural for a professional soldier. He did not seem to realize that a solution of the political problem, either in whole or in part, could have diminished or eliminated the military problem. An interesting fact uncovered by the more successful commanders of the colonial era. This is all of them trying to figure out basically how our society is falling apart and why did we just lose so badly. The French general Hubert Laetier ranks as one of these. Born and bred a royalist, Laetier was a devout Roman Catholic, likely a Jesuit, anyways, who became interested in social reform while a student at Saint Cyr intensely bright. Sounds like Illuminists. He pursued this interest during early prosaic postings. As a squadron commander at Saint Germain in 1887, he startled fellow officers by showing concern for the mental welfare of his troops. He arranged a large room supplied with tables, a library, lamps, where the men found books, games, a billiard table, and writing table. He continued interest in social welfare, brought him into contact with some of the leading French intellectuals, and he soon began to publish controversial articles in better journals. Writing in 1889 to 1891, Laetier thought he saw in the French officer corps of some 20,000 a potential for social force that could bring about necessary reforms. Internal changes in the corps were first necessary. Here's those internal changes. He argued, for example, that an officer must know his men better than his horses, which was not usually the case, provided the officer acquired a social conscience. However, he could indoctrinate conscripts with essential principles of patriotism and nationalism necessary for a renaissance that would ultimately repair the humiliating 1870 defeat by the Prussians. Although the 37-year-old major conceived this activity within the traditional monarchist church framework, his ideas created a mild sensation and marked him in some quarters as a socialist and revolutionary. All right? This is where much of the patriotism that you and I grew up with throughout our lives, it like made me want to be so patriotic that I would go and fight for my country and enlist in the United States Army. And as a junior in high school, I got emancipated to the government and was like, let me go fight your enemies, just put me out, I'll destroy them for you. That was all that strength of that young men in their strength, right? I had all that young men's strength, that nationalism, like our country is the greatest and the best. You know why we have that idea? Is because we're actually not educated. Like you're not actually taught, you're schooled, but you're not actually educated. And this is different because reading, if you just learn how to read, like Chelsea got some homeschooling material stuff that she was looking at and reading over with Naomi, you know, and they're like, here's how you do your letters. They're like, C, cat. They're like, draw the cat. Dog, draw the dog. Chelsea's like, why the heck am I going to have her write all these words for her first words over and over again? And I was like, this is literally designed to make you stupid. This is the stupification of our society, right? And I was like, hey, Chelsea was like, I'm going to just have her start writing the Psalms. So like she's having her practice the letters, writing the scriptures. So she's learning both things at once and she's memorizing and learning and studying the scriptures. And then I'm taking her out in nature and we're teaching her lessons about life and creation this way, right? We're going through this book that's called The Back to Basics, which is like a beginner's guide to all kinds of things in how to build a home, homestead, like canned food and butcher animals and raise flocks and how to garden. It's like all these things, how to build a house, how to saw lumber, how to build a hydroelectric power generating system, like all this stuff, fundamentals, like life skills. Like she's 5. She's more than capable of learning these things. She's most capable actually of learning these things. But I have to look at her and diligently impress these things on her. Young men and young women have this incredible impressionability. Their neurons are the most plastic and like liquidy at these young ages, and they're the most critical years for us to impress these words on them. They're the most important years for us to impress these words on them. If you would train them up with these things instead of the patriotism and the nationalism to a governing authority that is absolutely set itself up against the systems of our Creator's kingdom. Instead, if we would unite ourselves to these words and to his kingdom, he would be our governing king. He would be our king. He would be our sovereign. We're not supposed to have any other sovereign. No man is supposed to be a sovereign over us. Yahuwah and Yahusha, his son, are supposed to be the sovereigns over us, and that is it. We're not supposed to be reigning and domineering over men. It was never his will that we had kings. It was always his will that we understood he was our king. Okay? These are the further warnings in the book of 1 John. He said, do not love... He says, I'll say this again. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of Yahweh abides in you, and you have overcome the wicked one. But do not love the world, nor that which is in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but it is of the world. And this world passes away, and the lusts of it. But the one doing the desire of Elohim remains forever. Little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the anti-Messiah is coming, even now, how many anti-Messiahs have come? This is how we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have stayed with us. But in order that he might be made manifested, that none of them were with us. And you have an anointing from the Kadesh one, the set apart one, and you know all. I did not write to you because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no falsehood is of the truth. Who is a liar except the one denying that Yeshua is HaMashiach, the Messiah? This is the anti-Messiah, the one denying the Father and the Son. No one denying the Son has the Father, and no one confessing the Son has the Father as well. As for you, let that stay in you which you heard from the beginning. Since Genesis, you should have heard these words over and over. This should have been the water that was pouring over your mind, the water of the word from your beginning, the water of these words. Like my family, we're reading through Genesis. We're going to read, I know some people like to do Torah portions where they go from Genesis to Exodus, Leviticus, and then they do some of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and then the New Testament. I'm just trying to read the entirety of the scripture from beginning to end sequentially, like chronologically, as best as I can, to give my children the whole story as it progresses and as it laid out through history, right? But I'm also including the books of Yashar. Like, if you don't know why I include this book, That's because this book is also endorsed in this scriptures. Now, there may be aspects of this translation and of this version of that we have and inherited today that may not be exactly accurate to what it was when they were referring to it in the days of Joshua. Like Joshua references this book to record, hey, give veracity to the sun standing still and the moon standing still in a miracle that took place when Yahuwah listened to the voice of a man so they could kill a whole lot more bad guys. Yahushua prayed that the sun would stand still, and it did. And he says, is this not written in the book of Jasher? That's this book, right? Hallelujah Scriptures puts out these like individual versions of it, of Jasher and Jubilees and Enoch. And we're incorporating those as we're reading the Genesis account, because the Genesis account has like a synopsis of some of these stories, and you get like a 1-paragraph version of it. And in this, you get a chapter version of it. And it's incredibly rich and so powerful. And like, I was up for hours last night reading to Naomi in bed, just reading Jasher to her. And she was just like, because it's like everything you wished you could have heard when you were young and impressionable. It's like the greatest stories of incredible showdowns between like Yosef and Yehuda, and these like unbelievable breakdowns of these war of words that go back and forth between the two. Like, oh my gosh, but maybe I'll just read this. This is just crazy, okay? Hold on. Let me finish this verse. I know I'm all over the place because I'm most enthused, and I haven't talked to y'all in a while, and it's just like a little bit of diarrhea of the mouth because I'm most enthused about it, all right? But check this out. As for you, let that stay in which you heard from the beginning. If what you heard from the beginning abides in you, you also shall stay in the Ben and in the Father. And this is the promise that he has promised us, everlasting life. See, if we stay in these words, we get everlasting life. This is the most important things we could ever give to anybody else, is these words, to give them life. I have written this to you concerning those who led you astray. But the anointing which you have received from him stays in you, and you have no need that anyone should teach you. But as the same anointing teaches you concerning all, and is true, and is no falsehood, and even as it has taught you, you stay in him. And now, little children, stay in him, so that when he appears, we might have boldness and not be ashamed before him at his coming. So when he comes, like that water, that flinty rock that Moses struck, but when he comes this next time as the revealed Messiah, when he comes this next time, we want to have boldness at his coming and not be ashamed, because you know what? We know his words are abiding in us. They will make us know. For if you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone doing righteousness has been born of him. These are the greatest treasures we can ever find and share with others. This is the most powerful weapons in all of creation, is learning that there are many anti-messiahs that have gone out. Like, there is not just one antichrist you need to be looking for. Is it that guy? Is it that guy? No, that's like the Tim LaHaye, Jerry B. Jenkins, left behind mind control indoctrination you received. Like, this was an idea that was given to us that the Roman Catholic Church and many others Illuminist societies came up with, that like, you know what, we can't have them looking to identify the spirit of the anti-Messiah, the agents of the anti-Messiah that are roaming around. Instead, let's just get them focused on looking for one primary bad guy. And then we can kind of point them and direct them and misdirect them into different areas. But it says that there are many anti-Messiahs that have gone out. That's like the unclean foods, and how there's like, they're hiding pork in gelatin capsules. And you're like, I just want to take these supplements that are so good for my body. And instead I'm abominating myself when I make Hershey's chocolate bars and s'mores. And you're like, what, marshmallows are full of pig butt? Like, what are you talking about? Pig bones and marshmallows? Yeah, and Jell-O too. You're like, what the heck is this stuff doing and everything? And then you try to like break out of like pharmaceuticals. You start to like rip yourself away from the sorcery and the pharmaceuticals that are just there to indoctrinate us and poison us more. Like, you know how much fluoride? You're like, I'm not drinking fluoride anymore. I got it out of my tap water. Good for you. Do you know fluoride is like the main ingredient in Prozac? You're like, oh my gosh, these fluorines like are the most toxic chemicals like on the earth, like some of the most toxic persistent chemicals on the earth. And like phosphate companies that are mining these phosphates out of the ground, like down in Florida, the massive phosphate pits, and places that are like mining aluminum out of the ground and they're refining it. These are these waste products, these horrible chemicals. And they're like, we don't have anything to do with these. We don't know what to do with them. And it costs a ton of money for us to get rid of them. So you know what? If somebody, we don't have to store them as hazardous waste if someone buys it from us. So all the water and municipality districts, they buy it from us. All these pharmaceutical companies buy these waste chemicals from us, and they turn them into drugs and medicines that they put in the drinking supply in unlimited quantities, in massive quantities. And then they put them in their bodies as pharmaceuticals, and then they put them in their food as food additives, right? These are all of these, to me, it's like the anti-messiahs that are working their way into our bodies in every avenue and angle and every method that they can get their hands on us. And Yahuwah is like, come out of that. Come out of that. Be set apart. Don't be like that. Don't be like that. He's trying to get us out of it. You know, that's the ultimate war of the words that he's trying to get his people out of. If we can fiercely guard ourselves, if we can saturate ourselves in these words, like how much my daughters will have known about the scriptures if I read them the entirety of the scripture from their first days that they can actually hear and understand. How much more saturated is she going to be, is Naomi and Jubilee going to be with the word than they are with the world? You know, if you let your children turn on the Black Mirrors and watch shows and watch YouTube or watch Disney and watch these other things, you're allowing the waters of the world to wash over their precious, delicate, beginning minds and their hearts. And you know what? The enemy, like Disney's motto, is capturing the imagination. Their goal is to lock in the imagination, to infix in them an idea and a concept and an ethos so that they will go out and enact it in this world. They're magicians who are trying to make their words come to life. And the way we make words come to life is that we do them. We obey them. Who we obey shows us who our master is. And when we obey the systems of men, when we obey the governing systems of man, we show that they are our masters. But when we obey the governing systems of our Father, we show that He and He alone is our master. I know it was a lot, some of you to take in, but I hope you all would sincerely consider those words that I shared with you, because I love you guys. I want you all to be strong and to be able to wage your war effectively. There is each and every one of you that was made to fight in a war that is so ferocious, that is so cutthroat, that is taking the lives of people every single day. And I'm not just talking about their bodies' death. I'm talking about their souls, their satisfaction, their joys, their hopes, their dreams, their passions, their talents. And they're packaging them instead into these bricks to fit into a system that is abominable. And you know what? The Father wants us to be these living stones, these unhewn stones, these unique creations that is none other like it in all of the world, so that we can be built up and to be made into His temple. I long for you guys to experience that. And I hope and pray that you would indeed go and do that, to learn how to fight your battle asymmetrically. Because you know what? When Joshua got rid of all those abominations that had taken place in the camp, when Israel was finally freed from that, you know what? They were able to fight their battle way more effectively again. Let's go back to Joshua. Yahusha, chapter 8. And Yahuwah said to Yahusha, do not be afraid, nor be discouraged. There's that again. You just see, it's just everywhere. Altira, do not be afraid, nor be discouraged. Take all the soldiers with you. Arise and go up to Ai. See, I have given it into your hand, the sovereign of Ai, and his people, and his city, and his land. So you shall do to Ai and its sovereign as you did to Jericho and its sovereign. Only its spoil and its livestock you take as plunder for yourselves. Lay for yourselves an ambush for the city behind it. And Yahusha and all the soldiers rose up to go to Ai. And Yahusha chose 30,000 Gibberim, mighty brave men, and sent them away by night. Okay, that's one of the predominant characteristics you'll see about guerrilla warfare, is you fight at night. You move at night, you transport yourself around, you get around at night, because you know what? It's like a cloak. You can hide around and stuff. It's super helpful. Anyways, you'll see him do this constantly. Night fighting. Gideon did the same thing. He moved his soldiers in at night when he's like surrounded everyone with 300. That's the true story of 300, not the abomination that you learned. And we're brainwashed in by 300 in their amazing theatrical scenes of battle and warfare. The truth 300 is like Abraham slaughtering all of the giants. 5 giants wage an army. 5 giants armies. 5 armies of giants fight a war in the battles of Sodom and Gomorrah in that area. And Abraham and 318 of his servants go and slaughter them all, also by night. Crazy stories of fighting, y'all. You guys got to read these books. They're just epic. Anyways, and he commanded them, saying, see, you are going to lie in ambush against the city, behind the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you shall be prepared, while I and all the people who are with me approach the city. And it shall be, when they come against us as formerly, that we shall flee before them. Okay, this is called a feigned retreat, like a fake retreat, like, we're losing, run away. Like that, right? But you got to hook them good, son. You got to really make them believe that you're running for your life, all right? And you potentially got to be willing to get shot in the back, which sucks. All right. And they shall come out after us, until we have drawn them from the city, as though saying, they are fleeing from before us as before, and we shall flee before them. But then you shall arise from the ambush and seize the city, and Yahuwah your Elohim shall give it into your hand. And it shall be when you capture the city, that you burn the city with fire. Do according to the word of Yahuwah. See, I have commanded you. Okay, so now they're arranging signals, all right? So there's a group that's hiding behind the city. Okay, he's got the majority of his forces are behind the city. They don't know that though. The enemy doesn't know that. They have to sneak in behind the city, plant themselves there and wait. This is an ambush, like a snake in the grass, right? And then when these frontline, what appears to be the frontline forces, because remember, in the beginning, the soldiers at Ai, when they first fought the battle with the Israelites, they fought 3,600 of them. Is it 3,600? I believe so. And 3,000 men. 2,000 to 3,000 men. They go up and they fight against Ai. Well, when they ran up last time, they fought against them at the front of the city, right? And then they ran away as they lost. So they're basically going to repeat the same thing again. So they're going to put the majority of their forces behind the city, and they're going to put a small number at the front of their city, like a 10th, right? So they bring in the 10th at the front of the city, and they're going to start fighting them. They're going to act like they're losing, get their butts kicked, and they're going to turn around and start running away. And once they run away, the soldiers that are hiding behind the city are going to sneak into the city. They're going to set it on fire. So that way, the people that are running, the soldiers that are running, feigning their retreat, they're going to know that the ambush has taken place successfully and that they are now occupying the city and they're destroying the city. And then what's going to happen is they are going to be able to do like what's called like a pincher attack, where they're basically like a crab claw that's coming down on them like this, or scorpion pinchers. They're now going to be able to get them on their front and their back, right? Super epic, dangerous position to be in. Okay, as if you're surrounded at the front and the back, because you're always more vulnerable on your back, because you know what? It's hard to stab people behind you. It's just fundamentals of humans. Okay, so now the majority of the army is going to be back behind them, and the tiny lesser force is going to be at their fronts. But what it's going to do in the person in the center is it's going to melt their hearts with fear. Watch this. All right. And Yahushua sent them out, and they went to lie in ambush and stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Yahushua stayed that night in the midst of the people. This is a good commander. He's with the troops. Remember that guy was saying an officer should know his soldiers better than he knows his horses? That's definitely Joshua showing you that he's like that. He's like literally abiding with his people. He's not living outside the camp. He's not living in the temple. He's like, you know what? I'm going to be there in the midst of it with my people. And Yahushua rose early in the morning and inspected the people and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the soldiers who were with him went up and drew near and came before the city. And they camped on the north side of Ai, with the valley between them and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men and placed them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. So they stationed the people, all the army that was on the north of the city and its rear guard on the west of the city. And Yahushua went that night into the midst of the valley. And it came to be, when the sovereign of Ai saw it, that the men of the city hastened and rose up early and went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at a appointed place before the desert plain. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. And Yahushua and all the Israelites let themselves be beaten before them and fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people who were in Ai called together to pursue them. And they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Okay, so now it's not just the army. This is really important. There was just the army, but when you have an enemy that's en route, they call it, like fleeing, you would generally call up everybody you could. Okay, so like they're calling all the people that are even in the city. Like, come out and help us kill them all and collect the spoil. Because as soldiers are running away for their lives, like you've never run for your life until you've run for your life. Like if you have, like, you understand exactly what I mean by this. But the majority of people have never actually run physically as fast as they can, as far as they can, no matter what happens, they don't stop running kind of level running. They're running at that level, because if they don't, they're going to die. They're going to get shot in the back. They're going to get stabbed. They're going to hit with a rock. They're going to get cut into pieces, all right? So a lot of times what they do is they start shedding their armor. They start dropping weapons and all kinds of stuff. They leave horses, saddles get broken off, chariots get dumped. Like, you leave everything. You're just running for your life. You're going to run naked into the night if you got to, you know what I mean? So they come out and they spoil it. They plunder it. And so they call in everybody. They're like, come and get all the goodies. They're going to get all the goodies. We're going to kill these stupid Israelites and we're going to get all this good stuff. So it's a time of like, to the treasure. Yeah, famous last words. So there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Yisrael. And they left the city open and pursued Yisrael. And Yahuwah said to Yahushua, stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, for I give it into your hand. And Yahusha stretched out the spear that he had in his hand towards the city. And the ambush rose quickly from their place, and they ran at the stretching out of his hand. And they entered the city, and they took it, and hastened to burn the city with fire. First of all, do you have a spear? Because you might need a spear. Oh, that's so epic. He's holding his spear out in his hand. He's like, yeah. It's close to a spear. A beaver may have chewed it, but he's like, yeah, take him, take him, take him, take him. Oh, it's just so salty, man. You want to talk about like epic commander of an army? Totally Joshua right now. Right? Don't you want to be mighty like this? Don't you read stories like this and you're like, I want a spear. I want to stand on top of a mountain and tell an army to just go ahead and take it, burn it to the ground. Don't you want to do that? Anyways, some of us do. And the ambushers rose up quickly, and they burned the city with fire. And the men of Ai looked behind them and saw the smoke of the city rising to the Shemaim. And there was no power in them to flee this way or that way, for the people who had fled to the wilderness, the Israelites, turned back on them and attacked them. For when Yahusha and all of Israel saw the ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city went up, they turned back and smote and crushed the men of Ai. And others also came out of the city against them. So they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that side. And they smote them until none were left, and none had escaped. But the sovereign of Ai they caught alive and brought him to Joshua. And it came to be when Israel ended slaying all the inhabitants of Ai on the field, in the wilderness where they pursued them, and when they had all fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, that all the Israelites returned to Ai and smote it with the edge of the sword. And it came to be on that day, all who fell, both men and women, were 12,000, all the men of Ai. And Yahusha did not draw back his hand with which he'd stretched out the spear until he had put all the inhabitants of Ai under the ban. Only the livestock and the spoil of the city Israel took as a booty for themselves, according to the word of Yahuwah, which he had commanded Yahusha. And Yahusha burned Ai and made it a heap forever, a ruin to this day. And he hanged the sovereign of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset, Yahusha commanded that they should take his corpse down from the tree and throw it at the entrance of the gate, and raise a great heap of stones up on it to this day. This is the most vital and critical things to understand about the warfare, because they left none of them remaining. They followed the words of Yahuwah explicitly, and they were given complete victory in their areas of their life. And for some of y'all, I really strongly encourage you, fast some of these things that have gotten into your life, these infections, these otherworldly things, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life that have rooted their ways into you. Clear them out of your house. Remember seriously the words of Achan and ask the Father, is there anything that I have brought into my home? If there's anything that I've brought into my life, is there any idea or concept or doctrine or ideology that has gotten into my mind or the minds of my children that is counter to your system, that is anti your Messiah? Will you help me root it out? Please help me cleanse it out. And you can see that the Father gave Yahusha discernment to know and to find it. And I mean, we have done this with different things in our life over the years, with movies and videos and TVs and shows. We got rid of that stuff. We had to purge it out of our lives. And it was incremental, because you know what? Some of these idols are very deep rooted, and you have to uproot those systems. And you know what? Some of these things only come out by prayer and by fasting. And by fasting them and cleansing your body of them, cleansing your mind of them, getting them away from your house, it can set you free. Like, think about how different your body would be if you had peace inside you, if you had regular, healthy, vibrant energy that did not come from artificial chemicals all the time. Think about how passionate and zealous you would be for his ways if you weren't dependent on having these worldly things to provide for you your needs. It will hone you. It will change you, because you know what? When you stop looking for the world for your bread and you start looking to his word for your sustenance, he can change you from who you are to become more like who he is. And that is the deepest desire of my heart, that you all would learn to regard his word and to satisfy yourselves with the words that came from heaven, the words that came out of his mouth. I love you all. I look forward to talking to you soon. Live dangerously.